All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of GCC Cricket Podcast. I have the pleasure of having Pete Lamb with me. We are very thankful to have David as part of this podcast. David, Pete, and I have known each other for the last few years and learned a lot about him recently and his passion for cricket and also passion for the local cricket and also globally as well. David, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. Today, we're going to have a little bit more conversation and piggybacking on the conversation we had with Paul around the history and legacy of Philadelphia cricket. Paul talked through a lot of amazing stories, eye-opening stories in terms of how Germantown cricket players in the past and how things are evolving in the future. Today, we're going to focus on Merion and other cricket clubs around the area, and also a very historic tournament that has been played for a number of decades, the Halifax Cup. David, can you start sharing about your personal story, your connection to cricket? That'll be fantastic for the audience to hear.
My interest in cricket is because I'm Australian, and as somebody I met in Baltimore just 2 months before I was coming down to live and work in Philadelphia, he came up to me at a wedding function and said, "You're in the Merion cricket team next week." And I said, "How do you even know me?" He said, "I'm sitting next to your wife, and so I understand you're Australian." I said, "I am." And he said, "So therefore you play cricket?" And I said, how come you think I would be any good?" He said, "Listen, in the land of the blind, even Cyclops would be helpful." Anyway, that was my beginning. It was an unexpected delight to find that cricket was being played. This was 1989, and I'd just been sent down by my work to Pennsylvania, about an hour's northwest of Philly. I found Merion Cricket Club, and in short order, Haverford College, British Officers Club, Germantown Cricket Club, and Philadelphia Cricket Club. So unexpected and terrific.
Excellent. So glad that happened.
I was very pleased too.
Yeah. So how did, and you dug in the community even more. In your opinion, how did cricket take hold in Philly in the 19th century? And what made some of these cricket centers very unique back in the day? If we can take us back a little bit, how cricket was at that.
And you're talking about in North America, correct?
In North America.
Keeping it very simple, there was literally no cricket until, let's say, the 1830s, 40s. And at that period, America was industrializing and people were moving into cities and people wanted exercise, fresh air. People were beginning to become more health conscious, I think. And that was really the creation of team sports. Before that, most sports were individualistic. And cricket and baseball were the two team sports that became very popular, 1830s, 40s, 50s. New York and Philadelphia were the two strong centers. There was some interesting and good cricket apparently played up in Boston, maybe a little bit in Baltimore, but Philadelphia and New York were the stronghold. Then in the 1850s, New York developed a much greater passion for baseball, and there was a lot of betting on the games that became very popular. And cricket was still popular, but took a sort of second step. But in Philadelphia, cricket became even more popular in the 1850s than baseball at that time. And remember, baseball was not professional at that period. That was going to take another 20 years before they even mounted some of the early professional groups. So cricket, very popular, started to diminish in popularity in cities outside New York and Philadelphia. And probably most of it was being supported by British immigrants at the time because they knew cricket from their English experience. Philadelphia really became, as the 19th century developed, became a very strong center. And I think if you read the history books, there were as many as 60 cricket clubs active in Philadelphia, 1850s through 1870s. Germantown Cricket Club was one of those because it started pretty much same time as Philadelphia Cricket Club.
Yeah. I think it is wild to think about the 60 cricket clubs at that time. For people hearing this, there are so many cricket leagues right now in the Philly area, Philly, New Jersey, New York area. There's minor leagues, major leagues, and
Yep.
leagues, so many happening. Obviously, there's cricket play right now in Philly Cricket, Merion, Philadelphia Cricket more socially. There's
Okay.
the National Cricket Festival happening every year. There are probably more than 50 clubs who are playing cricket. But at that time, the quality of players were, from what we understand, was incredible, international quality. So who are some of the players for the viewers at that time who played in the area, and how did they stack up to
Yeah.
international
Yeah.
standards?
Subbu, you're right that the quality was very high. And those of you familiar with the history will know that statistics have always been important, as they are in baseball, many similarities. And there's also a gradation of matches at the international level between teams that are given test status. That's the pinnacle of the game. But the next level down, which is a very serious level of cricket, is first class. And Philadelphia was the one city in the US that could field a team that had first class status, as it's described. And I think Philadelphia, the Gentlemen of Philadelphia, which became the name of that team, played something like 30 first class matches. That meant that they had to play 11 against 11, none of these 18s or 22s versus 11. And you had to have a reasonable standard, or else the other team wouldn't bother playing you. And one of the families that was most important and most influential in that period were the Newells, who were members at Germantown Cricket Club. You can see images of the Newell family in many of the older American Graphic, Harper's Weekly. And there was a guy called Bart King, who was a first-class cricketer by any measure. The Philadelphia team had members at that time, because we're now in late 1870s through to early 1900s. And pretty much there was still a few more teams than the three cricket clubs today. Most of the players for those teams were provided by Germantown, Merion, and Philadelphia Cricket Clubs. Belmont was one for sure.
Yeah.
And many characters, and that team, the Gentlemen of Philadelphia, actually traveled to England and had perhaps 3 or 4 tours of England, starting in 1884. They had one in 1908, I think. There were 1 or 2 others. So it took on a life. And then what happened is the Philadelphia cricket clubs, working in unison, would invite visiting teams, usually from England. Sometimes it was a composite team of very high quality English players. Sometimes it would be some of the wandering club teams. There was an Irish team came. And there were 4 or 5 occasions where an Australian team who'd been in England playing, because the summer really ends in England by early September, they would catch the steamer across to New York and play in September and October on the way home to Australia at the end of an English summer.
Yeah. So as an Australian label at that time, I think from an international standpoint, when did actually cricket and things started in Australia? So was it around the same time in Philly as well?
Yeah, it really coincides with the 1840s, 50s. Cricket began to be more organized in the 2 major cities, Melbourne and Sydney. By 1850s, so very contemporaneous with the development of cricket in New York and Philadelphia, the 2 colonies began an interstate rivalry and decided to have matches. And that then led to them finally agreeing that maybe they could get together and play an invited team from England. That team came out only a year or 2 after an English team came to the US in 1859. Cricket really got going pretty much at the same time. And one of the benefits Australia had from that early visiting English team is that some players were offered money to stay and coach, and that helped develop the standards in Australia very quickly over the next 20 years or so.
Yeah. And it's become a part of the culture. Yeah, right.
It became the dominant summer sport. It became hugely popular. Australia, which had interesting labour laws, was one of the first countries. You didn't have to work on Saturday. That allowed people to play sport. It allowed spectators to go and watch it. And so cricket became the summer sport very early. It was still a colony at the time.
Yeah. That is cool to hear. I didn't know about this, right?
Yeah.
You're all thankful for it. Let's say.
Dave, I have a question about Australia. I don't think I said that.
IP, yeah.
But if I remember correctly, the U.S. teams and the Australian team had a contentious relationship. Is that right?
I think sometimes the Australian teams, the way I heard it, had too much night rivalry and weren't always well equipped the next morning to play. And I suspect that was because they thought the standard of cricket in Philadelphia wouldn't be that high and they didn't have to take too much care. I think they probably learned a few lessons from that and took more respect with the quality of the Philadelphian teams after a few early encounters. And I suspect the press played it up because they like some controversy, that's for sure.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, this is the first time you're also co-hosting, and you're amongst the three of us, you're the American here that started playing cricket. If you can talk about your journey, how you got into it, a little intro to the audience will be really good.
I think my experience prior to cricket was like most Americans. It's always been a faraway concept. Americans play baseball and American football. We have a whole universe of sports here. And cricket has always been a puzzle to us. It looks like baseball, but only superficially. I got interested just watching a couple minutes of it and told my wife that I might be interested in playing. She told me I had too many hobbies. So dropped it right away. Flash forward about 10 years, I was walking through Germantown. We had joined for tennis, and I got drafted onto the cricket team by the manager and asked to show up for a game 3 days later. So I was just thrown in the deep end immediately. Can't claim to be very good at it. I'm still learning the finer points, but it's been a lot of fun.
Pete, you had some questions?
Yeah. What role do you see Germantown having played in the shaping of Philadelphia cricket?
In the early days, it was perhaps equally important along with Merion, if not the most important. It was partly because of the Newell family, partly because of some other very good players there. The grounds, I think, was Nicetown part of Germantown.
It was, yeah.
Original ground, and that's where many of the international matches with visiting teams from, whether they were from England or Australia, played before moving to the Mannheim, the current Mannheim facility. And it was a very social event for the cricket. There were huge crowds, 10, 15,000 people all dressed up at matches at Mannheim. As the game fell away, which was really around the period 1910 to 1920, it lost focus. There are many reasons. Tennis became very popular. That was a sport available to females as well as males. The competition for facilities at the big social clubs like Merion and Germantown meant that there was pressure on the facilities, and tennis was often winning out in that time period. Golf came on the scene. That, of course, drew away many of the males that had been playing cricket or tennis. They drifted off to golf. And as the 20th century unfolded, cricket just lost all impetus and really fell away. The cricket clubs, the three that are still very strong socially and in racket sports today, stayed strong throughout the 20th century, but not in cricket. And I know the history in Merion was there's a guy called Tanny Sargent in the 70s, and he thought it would be a good idea to resurrect cricket. You had the C.C. Morris Cricket Library over at Haverford. Haverford College still had a cricket team. And C.C. Morris had been a member of Merion, etc. And so he revived it at Merion. When I joined in the late 80s, there was in particular one South African tennis player who had retired. He was professional, had retired, and had a tennis school in Philadelphia. He was very engaged with the Merion team at that time. Merion recruited a squash coach, and I think he's the head squash guy today, who's a New Zealander. He's familiar with cricket. Philadelphia Cricket Club got going in probably more the 80s, but starting in the 70s because they had a New Zealand squash coach. I remember some of the early matches I played with Merion were at Germantown. It was a fantastic facility. I had absolutely no awareness of it before I came to live in Philadelphia. It was only 20 minutes, if that, from Merion, and we would usually play a home and away. We'd get on because it was always competitive with tennis for the facility. We negotiated that we could play in April and May, September and October, but we got knocked out by the grass tennis. We'd have one game at Merion and later in the season, a second game at Germantown or vice versa. We would play teams coming down from New York, like Staten Island cricket team. The advent of the cricket festival in Philadelphia allowed a few other teams like the Kookaburras from New York, the Mad Dogs from Connecticut or wherever they come from, probably a bar somewhere, I suspect. But so those groups started to also want to come down and play games, and often they'd play one game on a Saturday at Germantown, and the next day they'd play at Merion, for example. And it was fun.
How would you describe the relationship or the rivalry between the three old line clubs?
I would say it was very positive. Each club hosted the other. There was usually a decent lunch served at the halfway point in the match, and there was beer readily available at the end of the match, and people would hang around and enjoy it. Sometimes groups of the players would drift off and have dinner. I know Merion members would invite Merion team members back to their home afterwards for a casual barbecue. I don't know if Germantown did that, but those days were fun and very enjoyable because it was social.
Yeah.
This was not high standard cricket, although both teams endeavored to get 3 or 4 players that were better than competent at cricket. It was useful to have a couple of good bowlers and a couple of good batsmen to ensure that you had a game. It was played in a very good spirit. And in those days, the matches would often be 35 overs, so they were a very full day, probably to the chagrin of the wives because they didn't realize when their men folk signed up for cricket that there was this sport that might start at 10 in the morning and not get home till 7 at night.
Yeah, it's a good escape. I'll tell you, cricket now is one of the fastest games in terms of the way the ball travels. It's very athletic. And there are several forms of cricket, right? When I talk to people in the US who never grew up in new cricket, right? So you always think it's like, guys, does it go for days? And that's the first question I always get. Curious to hear from your perspective, Pete, right? When you started, how did you envision it earlier and how your perspective changed after you started playing? Because you have to bust some myths here about cricket. There is a component of a longer format, but there are different formats of cricket.
Most Americans think of cricket as a 3 to 5 day event. There are forms of cricket that last that long, but it's unusual for any activity in the United States to take 3 to 5 days. A sporting event especially is only 3 hours is usually, I think, the time for instance, a baseball game takes. And there are forms of cricket that take that long too. You can play cricket from a half hour up to 5 days, probably even more if you wanted to. There are different forms. You can play with different balls. There's different sized fields. Some of my Indian friends have described 7 or 8 games being played simultaneously on the size pitch that we normally play on. The games will overlap. So it depends on your commitment to the game, how interested you are in it, how much time you have. People on our own team sometimes show up for half a game or a quarter game, whatever they can contribute. And there are, I think, internationally more strict rules about number of players in a single game. You're supposed to, I think, ideally, the 11 players that start the game are the 11 players that are supposed to finish the game. But we play more laid back version where we'll substitute people in because, for one thing, I think the average age on our team is 45 or so. So there's not a lot of people my age that are willing to stand out in the sun for 3 hours straight. So it's a very flexible game. And I learned that quickly. I think that probably within the first 10 minutes, I asked how long the game was and was told that my first game was a 5-hour commitment.
Yeah.
I can give you a couple of quick comments as an Australian who was more familiar with cricket than the average American at any of the Philadelphia clubs. I was surprised but pleased by the enthusiasm of the guys that would come out and play. They were really interested in fielding, and that's sort of often in a serious cricket country today, fielding is probably the least pleasant task, although the standards have elevated dramatically, I would say, in the last 20, 30 years. I always found the new to cricket American players really enthusiastic in the field, a little bit surprised that you had to catch the ball with bare hands. In batting, some of the players we recruited at Merion had played a lot of baseball, and you could tell immediately because a short pitch ball they could handle easily. Once they could see it, they could pull it, they could square it. But if it was pitched up, that's when they were in trouble. So the savvy bowlers knew what to do. But bowling was the tough thing for somebody new to cricket, bowling with a straight arm running up and keeping the ball somewhat accurate. That tends to be quite challenging, I think, to learn as a 40-year-old. It's probably the most difficult thing to do.
Totally. Thank you both for your perspective. I think I'm going to shift the conversation to key tournaments. So I'll tell you, as a long-term cricket watcher, I grew up in India. Obviously, my heart is towards India. But one of the tournaments I would watch is the Ashes. England versus Australia. It's quintessential cricket for a number of decades. So it's still being played. A series, it's coming up in shortly for this year.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Ashes is a bit of national pride at stake.
Yeah,
absolutely. In fact, it's more than sport, it's cultural.
We have a tournament called Halifax in the Philadelphia region.
Yep.
And I think, David, you did the research. This was even as old as Ashes series.
Yes, the Halifax Cup predates the Ashes. The Ashes were early 1880s, and the first Halifax Cup, if I remember correctly, was 1874. That was a follow-on to a game between the USA and Canada that had been played probably in the 1840s. There was a English military installation in Halifax in Nova Scotia, Canada, and they challenged a team from Philadelphia, which was the stronghold of cricket in the US. They said, why don't we have a competition and a cup? And that was the beginning of the Halifax Cup because it originated in Nova Scotia. And then that quickly morphed into a serious competition in Philadelphia with the then existing cricket clubs. If you go back and look at things like the American Cricketer, and there was a Spalding's magazine on cricket as well, 1880s, 90s, early 1900s, one of the prominent stories they cover is who won in the Halifax Cup. You'll see Germantown, Merion, Philadelphia Cricket Club quite prominently featured because that was the top competition in Philadelphia. So it quickly moved away from Halifax and took on a very strong Philadelphian flavor. There were a number of people. One of them was a guy called Amar Singh, sadly no longer with us. Amar came to Haverford College as a student from India, probably in the 50s, played for Haverford College, lived and worked in the Philadelphia area. I got to know him very well. He was a terrific guy. He was certainly one of the people that resurrected the competition for the Halifax Cup. He said, look, nobody's played this thing for 60, 70, 80 years, whatever it was. Let's have a tournament, which we began between the three now existing cricket clubs, Philadelphia, Germantown. We made up some rules. We said you had to have members play. We weren't always certain that each club adhered to that rule strictly. I think at least one club had a sort of summer membership that allowed them to recruit players, particularly for the Halifax Cup. It was terrific. We even played in 2008, maybe. We had the Halifax Cup in England at Lord's.
That is amazing. That is a place we would like to play in.
I think somebody should request a 20 or a 25-year reprise of that. That was all because an English player Derek Underwood, who played for England in the 60s, 70s. He came to Philadelphia as the guest of honor at the Cricket Festival. And later that year, he was going to become president of the MCC, which is a one-year appointment, very prestigious. Often former Test cricketers are in that role. And he said, and he got to enjoy cricket, and he visited Germantown, he visited Merion and Philadelphia. And he said, he said, I've heard you all play this Halifax, come and play at Lord's while I'm president. I have the ability to give you access to the ground. And he did. And we had a terrific weekend.
David?
Yes, I did.
Excellent. So how was it?
The details, it was fun. First of all, a combined Gentlemen of Philadelphia team. So I'd had many players from each of the three clubs played an MCC team. That's the Marylebone Cricket Club. And they were very good. They had a couple of Test batsmen. I remember bowling to a guy called Clive Bradley, who played Test for England. It didn't matter where you pitched the ball. He picked up the length before the ball was halfway down the pitch. He was not wildly hitting. He could hit it between the fieldsmen with finesse. And he knew the minute he hit it, he would just call to his partner, 1 or 2. And then I remember batting, not for very long, by the way. And they had a left-arm swing bowler. The fourth of his balls to me took out the middle stump, but I didn't see the other three.
What's interesting for people who haven't faced a fast cricket ball, you face one of those fast ones.
Yeah.
Contrast a bit.
In swinging with the odd out swinger.
So you probably had less than a half a second to react.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So that's one of the things, because I think people see, obviously, some of the social people see like ball thrown, them a little slow pace, and you just whack the ball.
Yeah.
And then people are like, yeah, this seems like doable. But when you face fast bowlers, you literally, like exactly what you said, you're losing it.
But what this bracket of discussion reveals is that some of the most fun, if you're looking to reinvigorate or add to the reinvigoration of cricket at Germantown, the idea of these tours, and whether it's visitors, we've had a couple of MCC teams visit Philadelphia in the last 30 years, and they've typically had 2 or 3 Test players. To watch people of that caliber at our clubs is fantastic. And if you can be in the team and actually be batting at the other end and watch what some of these good bowlers can do, it's quite inspiring, because you rarely get the opportunity to see it up close. In the tours, and I can speak from a Merion perspective, we've visited Toronto annually, Muda a couple of times. The Gentlemen of Philadelphia have been on a couple of English tours in the last 20, 30 years. And they're just plain fun. And you get to know the other members of the team, and you go to festivals. And as long as you have a competitive team, which means you have 4, 5, 6 players that are quite strong, then it can be really fun for the group of 20 that might go to the matches.
David, thank you for sharing that. I think I'm just going to go to another area now, the decline and the revival of cricket.
Yep.
I know Pete is the right person to ask this question, being a hardcore baseball fan. Jill, go ahead, Pete.
How did cricket get overcome by baseball? How did it lose ground?
Yeah, I think you can read some different stories, but I think baseball took on a very strong life of its own after the American Civil War. It was easier to play. You needed a field for sure, but you didn't have to have a properly prepared pitch or wicket in the middle of the field. You just needed some bags. And cricket could be played over 6, 7, even 8 hours, whereas baseball at a 3-hour length of time was more appealing to the American way of doing things. I think the idea of a draw, which is inherent in cricket and one of its strengths, was never appealing to Americans. Betting had a lot to do with it too. In the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of betting on the games, and they would put the odds in the newspapers. People picked it up in Baltimore, Illinois, Ohio, and Western Pennsylvania. And then there was a group, I think the Cincinnati Red Sox. I love baseball as an Australian who's interested in cricket. I love baseball because statistics, the fielding, the quality of the fielding, and the strategy around where you pitch different batters. I just think the speed of the game and the ease with which, didn't need a lot of equipment, just made it more appealing. The Cincinnati Red Sox, if you read some of the baseball history, they would have touring teams and go around the country. Cricket never had that. And then local teams would need to be strong to be competitive, even though they'd always lose. They quickly morphed into serious teams in each of those big cities. And out on the West Coast, baseball just took off after the Civil War and became a truly national sport. Played in summer, it became the national game. And cricket just stayed in Philadelphia. It declined in Boston, in New York, in Baltimore. It never had real strength other than social clubs. And I think the message is, if you want to be serious about a sport, you have to make it competitive at the top level. You have to encourage kids. You have to teach kids the fundamental skills of the game. And you end up needing, if not professional teams, competitive teams that can afford the time and energy and even the money to take it seriously.
So the three big clubs in Philadelphia were never heavily invested in baseball, though. What drove cricket from the field there?
I can tell you at Merion, it's funny, actually. I read the minutes of the first two meetings. Merion Cricket Club was started by a major in the Union Army who came back to Philadelphia, survived the Civil War, and he decided in 1864-65 that Philadelphia needed another cricket club, and he was going to start it. It was in Ardmore at the time, and he called it the Merion Cricket Club. At the first meeting, they decided to form a cricket club, and they did. And there's some stuff on the walls at Merion about it. They had a second meeting of the Merion Cricket Club, and somebody stood up and proposed that the charter be altered to add baseball to the sports that could be played. There was a huge outcry at the meeting. If you read the minutes of the second meeting, somebody stood up and moved a new motion that whoever voted for the previous motion would be immediately sent down from the club and barred from joining it. That motion was carried unanimously, or nearly unanimously. Anyone interested in baseball was basically thrown out at the second meeting. Tennis became very important maybe 20 years later. Merion was part of Merion Golf Club for a period of time, and then golf by the 1890s. I don't know how baseball didn't take hold in Philadelphia or Germantown, but it'd be worth finding out. But
Love that.
but the other point is these were social clubs. Members joined, and because they were a social hub for that community, obviously you needed reasonable means, income to be a member. And there was probably a certain social standing associated with being a member. And so it was never going to be serious about having professionalism until they started to, and they were already racket clubs, I suspect, by the time they decided they should have a tennis manager, coach, and people that could teach people squash. That didn't come till many decades later.
Yeah. And cricket now is the second most popular sport in the world.
What's the most popular? Soccer?
Soccer, for sure. Yeah, obviously in North America, cricket being LA Olympics coming up, and then there's lots of Major League Cricket being established. It's in the last 3 years, and there are more international players playing. Obviously, there's infrastructure challenges in terms of growing cricket here. But in terms of the international stature, it's amazing. Like the dollars, that rupees and the pounds flowing is unbelievable in cricket. And I was looking the other day in Instagram. Some of the cricket players have more followers, 10x more followers than LeBron James. Think of that in a moment. So take Virat Kohli as an example. He's got so many followers, way more than LeBron James. That's purely because of the population, for sure. But at the same time, just a global strategy. What do you think it takes to rebuild cricket? Especially now we have a lot of shorter formats, and Pete talked about it. What do you think needs to happen, and what other things are already happening so that viewers can understand?
I think it's a terrific question. I would say one of the factors in the repopularizing of cricket at the existing cricket clubs in Philadelphia is the increasing number of immigrants and now citizens in the US and in Philadelphia in particular from South Asia, Sri Lankan, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, all of whom have got rabid cricket followers. And so I think that's also added to it. You've got the core of players from the Caribbean are very strongly attached to cricket also. And so the question, what might happen, what could happen to cricket in the US? I'll give you my personal reflections on this. I think America, if it adopts cricket, and that's highly uncertain, will only adopt it in the T20 format or something like that, for the simple reason that it's the time frame is going to suit and appeal to the American public, because you need a public to generate TV revenues and player monies for development. And I think it guarantees a result. Americans, one of the reasons I believe that soccer's never become fully appealing in the US is people hate draws here. They want to win. And T20 gives you a winner, regardless, even if you have to go to the super over or what. I think cricket will, in order for it, I think it's got a good basis now with 5 major league cricket teams. And clearly those running those clubs can put some money into it. They're beginning to bring overseas managers, former test players and so forth. I think there's a window of time when the American season could fit in with the rest of it. That's part of the issue.
That's part of the challenge, right?
Part of the challenge for international cricket is when do you give the moment in the sun for each of the major participants? And it's a very crowded calendar. But the US has warm areas, and you don't have to play it all up in Buffalo, New York. You can play Florida, Texas, and so forth. I think the other factors which are going to be critical for it to become serious as a sport in the US is there needs to be a single managing authority, a group that has the best interests of cricket at heart in being established, that it doesn't become full of personal fiefdoms and some of the other political issues that can frustrate proper management and development. I think the ICC has to play some sort of overlordship. They probably have to contribute funds. You need people that can support ground development. You do need facilities. You need pitches. They can be drop-in pitches, but that's a whole lot of money and effort. And you do need the facilities. You need training. You need to be able to pay the salaries of good coaches that can get some of the kids. You need to do talent spotting. They're probably big enough South Asian communities and Caribbean communities in the US that you could go into some of their systems, and there's going to be any number of talented kids, but you need a recruitment system which is aligned somehow, which is how baseball does it, how football does it. And you don't have to make it completely universal, but those things need to happen. And then the publicity and the TV following can come.
Thank you for sharing that, David. On a personal level, so cricket for me, I've been on and off the game. Team sports get a lot of team spirit and energy, partnership. Obviously, there's an element of fitness, skill, and I just like all of that together in a team environment. What did you personally, you still play tennis, you still are involved in cricket much more. What did you learn personally? And then for especially like younger youth, your generation right now who are new to cricket in America, why do you think they need to go into a sport like that?
I became attracted to cricket literally probably as a 5-6-year-old. I could play it as a kid. It was just fun to play. It was a team. There were different skill sets. Different players could contribute differently. But at the end of the day, it was a team. And that there's something appealing about being involved with a group of 10 other people on the field with you. Even batting is a team effort. It's a team of 2, but that team of 2 can change 4 times in 20 minutes. It's about partnerships and recognizing other people's contributions. I think that's appealing to kids. Then you become interested in the top level, and then the players that are at the elite level, they become your folk heroes, if you will. And I've got family in Australia, and the kids before they're 20, they've all developed heroes. They happen to be the top players of their period of being young. Some of them don't get hooked. They go off surfing or something else, but many do. And I just think cricket has that appeal. And if you're statistically minded, you can have fun with that. I played it all through school and enjoyed it. Didn't matter who we were playing, but we traveled as a group when we played away games. It was enjoyable, and you got a lot of energy from it. It was quite different from the regular grind of studies or activities.
So, Pete, anything you want to add? Any questions?
I can't come up with anything. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. So, David and Pete, thank you for being on the podcast. I think this has been a great conversation, going into the details, and especially David as an Australian and moving to America, playing here and continuing to be involved in developing the game, and your passion and your thought process on how to build a game even further. So happy that you're part of the community and appreciate you always. And thank you, Pete, for co-hosting with me. Thank you.
I think the one thing that I probably didn't adequately recognize in closing is the importance of the Cricket Festival, which was really the brainchild of Craig Joss. And he did a superb job in coming up with the concept, garnering the engagement and involvement of the cricket clubs because the grounds were needed, getting the clubs, the spirit of the clubs to embrace it and host the dinners and provide the lunches has been tremendous. And I think that's been one of the big stimulus factors locally. Philadelphia's 3 clubs have derived immense benefit from that and had new teams introduced to them that you can play either at home or go visit.
It's always a blast, and we look forward to the festival next year. We'll see you there. I'm sure you will have some post developments on the Halifax Cup, some more to come.
And you got to go ask Mike Zekowitz. He was captain one day when I was captain of Merion in the Halifax Cup. We didn't have 11 players, and we were down to our last 2 batsmen. One of them happened to be me, and I said, would we be able to recruit our scorer if one of us gets out? Because we've still got 3 batsmen left, but they're not here. And Mike said no. He said, no, rules of cricket, get one of you out and win. So I went to my partner at the other end, who was a guy called Tony Vale at Merion, and I said, Tony, it's you and me. If one of us gets out, we lose. If we both stay in, we win.
So what happened?
We did not get out.
There you go. We will wrap with that, David.
Okay.
Pete, on that high note.